Hey everybody, Stacy Barnett, Scentsabilities Nosework, and we are live again. So this is another live Q&A, and I have actually I got some pre-submitted questions this time. If anybody who is on has questions, we'll take those first. I can always get back to pre-submitted if necessary, so we can absolutely do that too. I just want that way we have, a bunch of questions we can get to. I'm actually sitting here on the back porch, Robin Grubel's back porch right now, which is really nice. It's so pretty out here. I'm in the middle of, out in Iowa. I've got a beautiful view of just farmland and everything. Anyway, it's gorgeous. So, hi everybody. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and kind of jump into questions, and then kind of see where we are. My puppy is out here with me, and he's starting to go through a little bit of a fear period. So if you hear any alarm barking, he's just it seemed to have started today, and he's kind of coping with it a little bit. Took him to Baumgart's, and all of a sudden he thought a couple different things were kind of scary. So, it's just that's what puppies do. And he's now, I guess, about 17 weeks old, so he's starting to get into that. No, Ellen, I don't know anything about Rube's Steakhouse. I did go to the Iowa State Fair, which was really awesome. So that was kind of very, very Iowan to do, which was kind of fun. So, all right. So let me go ahead and I think if anybody doesn't have any specific questions about Nosework, I can go ahead and I had actually asked for a pre-submitted questions, so I'm just going to kind of open those up. I'm going to go from the top. I have a question here and I think what I'm going to do is just kind of sort these all comments. That makes it easy. Okay. I know there was a question originally from Mimi about teaching an indication. And I think it was just more of like a general, any tips for teaching an indication. So I thought actually that'd be a great opportunity to talk about trained final responses. And by the way, I love trained final responses. So you're not going to hear me say that I don't. I have a trained final response on my SAR dog. I also have a trained final response on Powder, my Nosework dog, who I taught her trained final response on containers because she started to go nuclear. She really kind of needed it. But I want to talk a little bit about when you might decide to do a trained final response. The thing is about a trained final response is that they're actually really easy to train badly. A lot of times we see a lot of handlers desire one because they're easy to read. I mean, oh my gosh, like the dog sits, right? Or the dog downs, or, something that's like super easy for the handler to read. And the allure of that is pretty amazing. Like, it's like, oh, well, the dog finds it and they just sit. Like, how much harder could it get, right? And that's just like that's like a massive allure for people, and they love that. And I get that. I totally get it, because how many of us, like, we go to call alert and we're like, we get like this like lump in our throat and we're like, alert, right? Like, we're kind of like afraid to say it because in some levels it's just going to kick us out, if we're wrong. In other levels it may just make us lose points, and that could cost us a title, depending upon the level. And we're really like, we're programmed to not want those no's. So it is so enticing to want to be sure, right? The hard part is that because of the behavior chain, which is search, locate, report, right? Where the dog is seeking out the hide. I used to use different words. I've adapted these words. These are Steve White's words, and I think they're awesome. Robin also uses them. Search, locate, report, right? So the first time they're seeking out odor. That's the search part of the behavior chain. You release them to search. They're seeking out odor. Once they encounter that odor, they get into the locate phase. They have that change of behavior. Now they're trying to locate, which is narrowing down the specific location of source, right? And that goes from, very wide, all of a sudden they narrow it down and they get down to the very, to exactly where source is. They start to settle on source. Now, at this point, they know exactly where the hide is. Now we transition to the third part of the behavior chain, which is the report part of the behavior chain. In that part of the behavior chain, now the dog makes the decision to communicate to the handler. And this is where the train final response happens. So if you have a sit, if you have a nose freeze, if you have a down, if you have a look back, if you have whatever, you've reinforced with your dog, or whatever you've trained with your dog, now the dog does that behavior. That's that report part of the behavior chain. Now, the problem is that part is very conscious. That part is the dog gets all the way to source. Now the dog transitions out of searching, out of hunting, out of sourcing, right? All of this hunt, right, is going towards getting to the hide. Now the dog has to transition to doing a trained or highly reinforced behavior to purposefully and consciously communicate to the handler the location of source so they can get their reinforcement. Now, the hard part about that is that part, if you don't train that well, and if you don't really solidify the get to source part of it, if you don't solidify all of that, then what's going to happen is, they're going to give you the behavior or not. Maybe they don't, but maybe they give you the behavior, but they're nowhere near the source. Maybe there is no source. This is why it's so important for the, this is why actually it's so difficult to train this. Now, as far as the question was about tips for training it. First of all, my first tip is make sure you actually need it, because once you go down that path, you're training it, right? And you either got to train it well or you're going to train it badly. Now, the problem is that it's actually pretty easy to train basic hides. Basic hides, you find source, you do a behavior. No big deal. Your basic accessible hide. The problem comes down when the hides get hard, when airflow gets hard, when scent theory gets hard, when the dog has to put out a lot of effort. When you have all of that, it gets hard for the dog. Now, the dog who may not have a ton of drive may get to a point where they're like, this is good enough, right? That is where the rubber meets the road and where the train final response erodes and falls apart. This is why I actually don't suggest putting a train final response on a dog unless they're either extremely high drive or they're somewhat high drive and destructive. And if you are up a creek with the destructive part of it and your dog is not high drive, it's going to take a lot of work, because at that point, you've got to untrain and give your dog a new behavior. And I actually suggest for those dogs to stick with a TFR only on containers. Otherwise, I really suggest handlers get really good at reading their dogs and ending the behavior chain at the end of locate. And even when you have a high drive dog, with a lot of those dogs, I also suggest that. I have that with Powder. And as far as high drive, she's about as high drive as I've ever seen. And it's so, it's not that. It's that I can have a really, as long as I can read my dog, I can have a really, really precise and accurate search. I'm not required in the sport of Nosework to have a TFR. So why complicate things unless I need to? That said, for my search and rescue dog, I have to have a TFR. And there are other reasons for that. One of them is she's an area search dog. And honestly, if she's found somebody, 100 yards away in deep cover, in deep woods, and it's night, I'm not going to know she's found them unless she comes back and tells me. She's a refined dog. So there are definitely some reasons to absolutely have a TFR and in those types of situations. But in general, for sport dogs, it's really easy to train it really badly. If you have everything that falls into place for TFR, you've got the high drive dog, or you've got the somewhat high drive dog, you've got a destructive dog. Tips are, I mean, or actually, if you're introducing it, a lot of that is that it's kind of like, it's a cued behavior. Have your behavior on cue. One of the most important things is that, you can tell the dog to do the behavior. If you have a behavior that's not a freeze, if you have a behavior that's more of a sit or a down, you've got to make sure you have that behavior really fluent on cue. So you can verbally tell them to do it. Because if you can verbally tell them to do that, then you can fade the verbal and they start to do it on their own. That's kind of the way that's done. So hopefully that answers that question. So there's a question live. So I'm going to get to that and then I'll flip back over to the pre-submitted because I just think that that's probably the easiest way to do this. So Donna has a question here and says, "Hi, Stacy. How do you incorporate a toy reward for Nosework, especially when you've primarily been using food?" Awesome question, because it's not as straightforward as you might think. This is a really great question. Let's say you have a dog that's bonkers over toys, and you want to use, even if you decide not to do in a trial, which honestly, toy reward in a trial can be a little complicated. It can be a really amazing thing to have in training. In your training, your toolbox, right? Your training toolbox is an amazing thing to have, because what you can do with toys is, if the dog truly loves a toy, the cool part about it is that you can utilize the prey drive of the dog, that can overpower a lot of distraction. So you can increase motivation. The dog really loves it, and you can overpower distraction. It's really kind of the best way to do that. Can you overpower distraction with food? Yeah. Is it easy? No. Can you do it? Yeah. This is where you want to use like food play and stuff like that if you want to get into overpowering distraction. But having the ability to play and having toy rewards, like, it's an amazing tool to be able to use, even if you don't trial with it. I do a lot of toy reward in training. I don't do a lot of it in trialing, because food is actually just very, very easy to use in trialing. It's very convenient. It's very fast. But I do like to have it in training, right? So I have a dog that I do, Brava she ball rewards a lot. So I do a lot of ball reward with her, and it really helps to build her motivation, which I love. But to do it, what was really funny was that the first time I threw the ball, she looked at me like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "That's not what we do here." And I also have Powder, who's bonkers. I mean, totally bananas for toys. And up until recently, I have not been able to toy reward that dog, which it seems weird, because here's this dog that is like she hits, like, when people talk about what they picture Malinois doing when they hit toys, that's what she does. That is her, like, dedication to the toy. She doesn't look like a lab when she hits it, right? I mean, she literally runs at me and swings on me and does a switch like, I can't believe I still have 10 fingers, right? But I would give her the toy and she'd be like, "That's not what we do. I get food." So it was actually really hard to do. What you need to have to be able to do to get the dog and start incorporating toy reward is, first of all, make sure the dog will play with that toy, not just at home, but anywhere. Because if the dog really can't play with that toy anywhere, that toy is probably not valuable enough to really use it as a reinforcer. I mean, you can, but in that case, you'll only be able to really use it effectively at home. So keep that in mind. So that's kind of like your litmus test of trying to figure out, can you use that toy as a reinforcer, right? So first of all, can you play with that toy away from home? If the answer is yes, then your dog readily engages with that toy. And I'm just talking straight play. The answer is yes, it has a potential for being a reinforcer. If the answer is no, but they will readily engage and happily play with that toy and they get totally excited about it at home, then you can use it at home. But if the answer is like, "Meh, I'm not sure if I really care about it at home, or sometimes I'll play with it, sometimes I won't," odds are it's not going to be a reinforcer, and your best bet is to actually stick with food play. Use your food in that case as a toy and use it in food play. as a reinforcer. And there's nothing wrong with that. It actually, it works really well. So those are kind of your choices there. Now let's say you can do that, right? So now you've got to try to figure out, okay, let's say my dog will play. They go off and they'll play, anywhere. And I'm like, okay, cool. Now I have something that can be a reinforcer. A lot of times what I'll try to do is first I introduce the idea of the toy as a reinforcer. These are just different steps that you can do, right? So I'll introduce the toy as a reinforcer. So I may ask the dog to do something, and I'm talking away from Nosework. I'm not asking them to search. I'm doing something else. Maybe ask the dog for a sit. Maybe I'm doing some healing. Whatever it is that I've taught the dog to do, the dog, it's a known behavior. I'm doing basic training. And what you'll probably want to do is start this at home. So even if your dog will play away from the house, start this at home. Do it at home. And you ask your dog to do the thing. Give the dog the marker for that toy. Sometimes, like I'm really big on, I like location-specific markers. So I'll have like a different word for the toy. I'll give that word, and then I give the toy. It's not necessary. You really can, you can use the same one if you want. I like location-specific markers. So I may say catch, which is, I'm throwing the ball at your head, catch the ball. Get it, which is, get it and then throw the ball or something like that. So, or strike, right, for the tug. So whatever it is, so I'll do whatever the behavior is, not Nosework, and I'll do that. So that way, now I'm giving the dog the idea that the toy is now a reinforcer. And I do that a bit. So all this is before I even get to searching. Now, what I generally do to try to introduce a concept, because this is where it gets really hard for dogs sometimes, is I do like stupid easy hard, like it's stupid easy hide, like basic hide, right? Very easy hide for the level of that dog. I'm working with, powder summit level, successful summit level dog. I'll do like an easy hide, silly easy hide for her. That's easy hide for her. It doesn't necessarily mean easy hide for another dog. It's easy hide for her. So whatever it is, whatever is easy for that dog, you set that. They get to that. I give the dog, first of all, so one thing I'm going to start doing is I give the dog the normal marker. For me is yes, right? Yes. I give the dog a piece of food. Now I break out the toy and I start to play. That's kind of the bridge. That's how I start with it, right? And then we play, right? So I start by using yes, piece of food. Now I play. Now I'm starting to introduce a concept like, hey, now we might decide to use this toy in this context. Now, granted, I've also given the dog the markers for the toy, that kind of thing. I start to do all of this. And now I'm getting to the point like, okay, now I'd like to start to use the toy for the hide, right? But I have to kind of use it as in conjunct, like a sequential reinforcer. I don't know if that's a name or not. I'll call it that. I use the reinforcers in sequence. So it's because reinforcers will help to reinforce each other, that kind of things, right? So I use it like a sequential reinforcer. Then what I'll start to do is I'll do a, really easy hide. Now I start to give the dog their toy reinforcer marker, right? Which is get it, right? And then I do massive play. At first, they may go, what? And you may have to encourage them a little bit. But after a couple repetitions, they'll start to catch on a little bit. And then you want to have a massive play session. And they start to realize like, oh, I can get that by doing that. And they'll start to build on it. And then with that, you can start to increase. Hey, Jack. Good boy. With that, you can, that's my puppy, he was getting into a puddle. With that, you can start to build, the complexity of the hide. Now, keep in mind, the longer your dog has been a food reward only dog, the longer it may take to get them on the toy reward. And then keep it variable. It's not always toy, not always food. So with my newer dogs, I try to change it up more. And I try to keep them guessing, because I think what happens a lot of times is dogs get that, like, they get rules. Those dogs that have rules, right? We don't know anything about anything like that, right? It's like those herding breed dogs, especially, they all have rules, right? They have rules, and they get to the point where it can get hard to change their reinforcement practices because they have expectations. The thing is about reinforcers is that there's an expectation bias, right? The dogs have expectation, and if you don't meet their expectation by giving them the reinforcement that they want, they can actually get disappointed, and it's almost a punisher. So that's why, but at the same time, toys have a tremendous potential, because they can, by using the prey drive, right, they can massively increase motivation, and they can overcome distraction in ways that food really struggles by doing. Especially if there's like food on the ground. Well, scavenging is really fun for dogs. Will they really ignore like the distraction on the ground for the food that you have? Right? That's the hard part. Oh my gosh, this is about to be mass chaos because the other two puppies are coming down to play. I love it. It's so much fun. So those are my thoughts. That's how I would introduce toy reward when the dog has been primarily using food. Yeah, there's like total mass chaos. There's like 3 puppies right now. Oh, it's so much fun. So Caroline says she uses food in the search area and she uses a toy away from the area. That you can totally do that. But the really cool part about using a toy, as an actual reinforcer, is that you can overcome distraction a little bit more, and it gives you a lot more motivation where assuming your dog actually has value for it. So you have, like I said, you have to kind of build that first. So we have a few more minutes. Let's see if we have just a couple more questions that we might want to answer here. I'm going to try to pull something up. All right. Here's a question. When given a choice of on or off leash search, how do you decide? That is a really awesome question. And a lot of times it's really going to come down to knowing your dog, right? I would say for me, again, this is for me, so this is going to be the answer. Like, how do I decide? Maybe different than how you guys decide. How I decide is I need to know what I need to understand the dog I'm working. If I have a high arousal dog that I trial with a lot, which is Powder. And I have to say, I primarily default to on leash versus off leash because I'm able to adjust, like micro adjustments of her arousal throughout the search on leash. That said, this is of course I'm talking about, assuming you have an option, right? Because a lot of our searches, we don't necessarily have options. But the other thing is I may decide also based on so then let's say, let's kind of take that off the table and let's just talk about, I may decide more based on the parameters of the search. I may look at the search area. I'm much more likely to go off leash if I know how many hides there are. Because here's the thing about off leash is that as soon as we take the dog off leash and we're under tight time pressure, it can be hard to make sure that you've cleared everything. Because let's face it, unless you are 100% confident that your dog is actively searching the whole time, it can be hard to know what has your dog actually cleared and what they haven't. And then you end up with this like split focus as a handler. Like, did they clear that? Did they not clear that? And now your dog's off doing something. And like, oh, by the way, they went around a corner and now I can't see my dog. And now I'm trying to catch up with my dog, but I don't know if my dog actually cleared this area over here. I don't know if I have to get back over here. And oh my gosh, did my dog just have a change of behavior? I don't know. How many hides were there in the search area? Did they tell me 3 to 5? Or was it unknown? And oh, wow, 30-second warning, right? This is one of the reasons why I may not go off leash. But if I know, for instance, I go and I'm like, okay, this is a big search area. They've given me 3 minutes. They told me there's 3 hides. You know what? I very likely might go off leash. So it's really going to depend on the dog. And that's assuming that my dog is going to keep their brain after they find a hide, or that the search area isn't so large for a high arousal dog that is just going to spin them up, right? So you kind of have to know your dog, and there's a lot of it depends answers there. It's all about it depends. But those are some things that I might be thinking about. Generally, if you have a dog that gets, it's so funny, all the puppies are running around like crazy. They're very adorable. If you have a dog that's going to have independence issues, those are your dogs. You like they kind of like, as soon as you put the leash on them, they're like, oh, hi, mommy, are we going for a walk, right? Those are the dogs that really benefit from off-leash, the dogs that have independence issues. But if you have a dog that's really independent, you know what? And that's something that I actually build from day one. You know, if I have a dog that has independence issues, rather than thinking like take them off leash and do my search off leash, you know what? I'm going to fix the independence issues. You know, it's more of that for me where I'm like, okay, that dog needs independence work. So I'm going to work on independence. And now I can go and I can start to make the decision based more on the search area, based more on the parameters, less based on the fact that my dog has independence issues. So what I try to do is not, compensate for my dog's issues in their training by making adjustments in my decisions for on or off leash, or my decisions about how I'm going to handle. Right. So what I would rather do. Oh no, they're digging the mud. You guys, puppies are the best. And if you don't have a puppy, you should get a puppy. They're amazing. Anyway, that's hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, so just looking back at the comments here, I use a toy at our very first and only trial. In training, I switch it up. But last hide always gets a toy. I also use random rewards, not a reward at every hide. I say, good, find another instead of yes. Okay. So I would just say if you do that, make sure you train it so that your dog actually understands that there's a sequence to that and that they ultimately will get a reward. So, all right. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll probably wrap it up there. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we have 2 questions here, and we'll at least get through the first one. I understand it's recommended not to use the word alert in training. Does this also apply if the training session is on blind hides? And if so, what do you suggest? My usual marker when I know where the hide is located is yes. I feel uncomfortable using this on blind hides. That's very good thought there. In case the call is incorrect, you're absolutely correct about that. Sometimes find the finished call in training is now understood. It can make it more difficult to re-engage her in the search to find a missed hide. And then you have a container question. So let's go ahead and first, let's talk about, actually, we may come back to the container question on the next live. But let's talk about using the word alert in training. Don't use it. Just don't. Here's the thing. When we go to a trial, we are required to use the word alert. We're just straight up required. It is in the rules. If we want to get credit for that hide, we have to call alert. And the thing is that it becomes a de facto marker for the dog. I don't care if you say, I don't train with markers. If you trial, you're using markers, right? And even though you might be saying, well, I don't train with it, you're still using markers. It doesn't make a difference, right? So your dog is going to be hearing the word alert, and they're going to be associating alert, usually, hopefully, with a reinforcement, because usually, hopefully, you're correct. So then what happens is, okay, now they're like, okay, we're cute, cool. Every time I hear the word alert, I get a cookie. And it turns into a marker, even though we don't intend to. And unfortunately, it's on blind hides because that's what happens at a trial. Here's the other thing, though, that a lot of times we don't think about, is that when we are trialing, we never actually know exactly where the hide is located. We don't, because we didn't place it. We can't see it. It's not visible. So unless you're using containers, you actually don't really know how. And even then, I mean, the hide's actually in the container anyway. So you can take that off the table for this example. But we don't actually know how precise or how accurate your dog was. We can make an assumption. Oh, I think my dog was right on the hide. Yeah, you think so, but you don't know. And a lot of times, judges are nice. They have what's considered like a yes zone, right? Yeah. How many of us have found a hide under the bottom of a chair? All of us, right? Do you know exactly where under that chair that hide is located? Probably not. You're going to get a yes for the whole thing. So, and a lot of times, when we're talking our inaccessible hides, like, oh my God, I mean, I think I've found hide 15 feet up or whatever. We can't be exact, right? And we say alert, we get a yes. Sometimes the judge is feeling nice. Sometimes they have a big yes zone, right? So now you've given your de facto marker off source. And the more you trial, the more you're giving that de facto marker off source. Now, the last thing I want to do, because I don't trial all that much. So honestly, the damage is there, but it's probably not as big, not huge. However, that said, if I go and I train now, and I use that word, now my damage is going to get huge, because now I am strengthening that word as a marker. That marker is gaining in value. It's increasing in value. So now when I go to trial and I use that word and my dog is off source, now I'm really marking my dog for being off source. So I don't use it. However, that said, now let's go back to the example of you're working a blind hide in training. And in that case, what I usually try to do is, tell your, whoever is you're working with, is that you're going to communicate in a different way. And whatever you decide to do, however you decide to communicate, just do something. Sometimes I just say, that's it, or is that it, or something, or raise my hand. Or I've heard of some people where they'll like pick a word of the day. I don't know, whatever you want to do, just don't use a word alert. And you're absolutely correct, that if you, what you don't want to do is use yes without getting actual confirmation that you're actually at the hide. So those good thoughts there. So I think we're going to wrap this up, because we're at 30 minutes, and we will end up, I'll answer the rest of that question, because there was a 2-part question. The next one, also want to mention let's see, today is the 13th. The 15th is the last day to sign up for my classes at Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. I'm running 3 classes this term. The first one is NW 120, which gets your dog searching novel areas for the first time. So if your dog's on odor, and I have all these lectures that's all about these foundational, important things that are not just about getting your dog out and searching different areas. They're super, super important lectures. Even things about reading your dog, airflow, preparing your dog for a trial, how to, acclimating your dog in a search area, that kind of thing. So there's that one. Then I have NW 185, which is green dog setups. These are basic setups to try to change up your hide placement a little bit and to work on those foundational concepts that are really important. And then the third one is NW 440, which is sourcing. That's my sourcing class. And that's all about building that motivation, that drive to source, and in order to help that and help the dog to understand what source is. So when you build that motivation and you build the concept of source, you start to get better sourcing. So those are the classes I'm offering. They're only available to register through the end of the 15th. Today is the 13th. August 15th, at the end of August 15th, that's it. And if you message me like, hey, can you help me? I was too late. I don't control any of that. My answer is going to be, I'm really sorry. I really wish you signed up. I can't do anything. So if you want to get into one of those classes, make sure you do that. It's a 6-week class, and you can get feedback at every level, which is really amazing. For $65, that's like crazy low. 24/7 access to lectures. So anyway, that's, I wanted to kind of let you guys know about that. Otherwise, I would say, I hope you guys are really enjoying these weekly Q&As, and if you, and I'll try to make it so that you can pre-submit questions. If you've pre-submitted a question, I didn't get to it, it's on my list now. Well, I'll have to just keep going back to that and make sure I answer all those questions. And if you didn't get your question answered here live, make sure you add it to that list, and we'll just keep going through those. So thanks again. I appreciate everybody, and I'll chat with y'all later. All right. Have a good one.